It never starts with a plan. It starts with a feeling, a twitch in the mind, a sharp moment that passes too fast, a thought you didn't ask for, but can't stop repeating. You shake it off. Tell yourself it's nothing, just anger, just stress, just imagination. But then it comes back, not louder, deeper. Let's talk about the first seed. The moment a boundary is imagined, not crossed. You're still you. You still smile in public, still go to work, still tell jokes. But inside, the wiring has started to shift. Something is circling. Let's talk about cognitive dissonance. You think you're a good person, but you're angry. You feel violated, unseen, small, and the mind cannot accept both truths. So it begins to bend. It says, they deserve it. They did this to me. They made me think this way. It's not about hurting. Not yet. It's about justifying. Because no one wakes up and says, today I'll become a monster. They say, I'm just trying to balance the scales. Let's talk about micro rage. It's not one big explosion. It's a slow burn. Someone cuts you off. Your boss talks down to you. Someone laughs when you weren't joking. And it sticks. Not because it's extreme, but because your brain is collecting it, like evidence, a quiet trial playing out inside you, where every insult, every slight, every humiliation gets filed away. And every time the file grows, the thought returns. They don't know who they're dealing with. Let's talk about fantasy rehearsal. You begin to imagine, not clearly, not deliberately. You just see it. The confrontation, the moment you finally say what you've never said, the slap, the scream, the silence after. At first, it ends there, but then your mind keeps going. You imagine what happens if you don't stop, if you keep pushing, if you don't hold back, and to your surprise, it feels good. Not because you're evil, but because in that fantasy, you finally have control. Let's talk about psychological tipping points. You don't snap all at once. You erode, thought by thought, story by story, until one day, the idea that once scared you starts to feel like a solution. You no longer think, I would never. You think, maybe I could. Maybe I should. You start to watch people differently, not as individuals, as threats, as pieces in your growing equation. And that thought, the one that doesn't go away, it begins to change shape. It's no longer intrusive. It's familiar. It's yours. Let's talk about mental rehearsal loops. You keep running the scene over and over. Not the blood, not the violence, the moment before, the silence, the breath, the decision. Because that's where your mind lives now, in the pause, before the line is crossed. And slowly, the pause gets shorter, the resistance weaker, because repetition rewires the mind. And if you imagine something enough, part of you starts to believe you've already done it. Let's pause here. You think criminals are born with darkness, that they want to hurt, that they planned it from the start. But most of the time, it starts in the same place as everyone else. Pain. Pain that festers, that gets turned over and over until it becomes justification. And then justification becomes permission. The thought isn't scary anymore. It's comforting. It explains everything. And when that thought stops being the enemy, you're no longer just thinking it. You're waiting to act on it. It doesn't happen in 1 second. It happens in silence, in the space between thoughts, in the justifications that no longer feel like lies. You wake up one day and the world feels the same, but you are different. Not broken, not enraged, just ready. Let's talk about what happens when the line between thought and action starts to fade. You've imagined it. You've run the scene in your head. You've heard the arguments, seen the consequences, over and over. And now it's normal, not shocking, not terrifying, just there, waiting. Let's talk about desensitization. Every time you revisited the fantasy, it hurt less, frightened you less, surprised you less. Now it plays out like a habit, like brushing your teeth, like locking a door. You're not plotting. You're preparing emotionally, psychologically, neurologically. The horror has worn off. The resistance has worn down. Let's talk about moral bypass. You still believe you're good. That's the scariest part. You're not thinking, I want to hurt someone. You're thinking, they left me no choice. You shift the blame, build your case, filter your memories until you become the victim. And if you're the victim, then anything is justified. Even this. Let's talk about isolation. You stop talking about it. You stop hinting. You go silent, not because you've let go, but because you can't risk interference. You become colder, not on the outside, but on the inside. Your empathy thins. Your focus narrows. Your body moves through the day like a machine. You're not human in the same way anymore. You're a container, a sealed vessel, holding one idea that no one else can see. Let's talk about rituals. You start doing things in patterns, repeating routes, watching windows, checking locks, counting steps, testing silence. You're not even sure why, but it calms you because your mind is preparing for control, and control is all you have left. Let's talk about emotional suppression. You don't feel sad anymore. You don't feel angry. You feel nothing. And that nothingness becomes fuel because now you can think without flinching. You can move without guilt. You've become efficient, focused, ready. Let's talk about the dissociation effect. You begin watching yourself from the outside, like a film, like a performance. You hear yourself talking, laughing, pretending, but none of it is you. You're not there anymore. You're already in the future, in the moment. The scene, the impact, and that separation makes anything possible. Let's talk about the absence of fear. You should be terrified. You're not. You've crossed so many lines in your mind that the final one, the real one, feels like nothing because fear lives in uncertainty. And you're no longer uncertain. You've already made the decision. The rest is just waiting. Let's pause here. You think the scariest part of a crime is the act itself, but it's not. It's the moment before, when the mind lets go of its last resistance. When the person who once thought, I could never, whispers, I'm already there. This is the moment when conscience becomes quiet, when reality feels light, when thought becomes intent, not loud, not manic, but calm. And that calm is where the danger lives. There's no music, no rush, no dramatic thunder rolling in the distance. There's only stillness. The mind is blank. The heart is quiet. The body moves. And when it happens, when the moment you've played in your head, it becomes real. It feels unreal. Let's talk about the psychology of the act, not the horror, not the aftermath. The exact moment when a crime is committed, when thought becomes action, when the idea stops being a ghost and becomes blood, sound, and breath. Let's talk about the altered state. Many who cross the line describe a sensation like floating, as if they are watching their own hands, as if they are performing, but not fully present. Because the brain, in high-stress violence, often detaches to protect itself, to survive, to dissociate from what it cannot integrate. Let's talk about sensory distortion. Sound becomes muffled or deafening. Colors blur. Time stretches. or snaps. You may not feel your own body. You may not even remember the exact moment of contact because the mind is focused on completion, not detail. Let's talk about narrowing awareness. Everything else disappears. The world reduces to a single point, the act. You forget where you are. You forget what comes after. You're not thinking about jail or guilt or consequence. You are inside a tunnel, and inside that tunnel, your rules no longer apply. Let's talk about moral disengagement. In that moment, you don't feel evil. You don't feel anything because you've already justified it. Already told yourself, this isn't really wrong. They provoked you. They deserved it. You had no choice. It doesn't feel like destruction. It feels like release. Let's talk about emotional override. Your nervous system isn't built for this. It floods with adrenaline. It drops into primal reaction. And the higher brain, the one that reflects, that judges, steps back. You're not reasoning. You're doing. And the action feels automatic. Because in your head, you've rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. Let's talk about the internal split. Part of you is fully involved, eyes sharp, breath steady, but another part is far away, watching, recording, detaching, and that part will return later to replay everything, to judge, to punish. But right now, that part is silent. Let's talk about threshold amnesia. Some people forget the moment entirely. They black out, lose seconds, sometimes minutes, and when they return, they're holding the evidence, breathing heavily, staring at what they've done without understanding how it happened. Let's talk about the instant after. Time returns. The noise creeps back in. Your hands shake. Your vision clears. You feel the weight of your body again. You feel the room. You feel what you've done. And for a second, everything stops. Not out of triumph, not out of fear, out of recognition. The line is behind you now, and you cannot go back. Let's pause here. You thought crime was chaos, that it came from rage or hate or madness. But sometimes it comes from calm, from precision, from a slow erosion that ends in silence, and then a single irreversible moment. And when it happens, you don't become someone else. You become the version of you thought you could keep buried forever. The act is done. The sound fades. The silence settles. You are standing where you were before, but the world has changed. The room is still. Your breath is shallow. Your thoughts are not what you expected. Let's talk about what happens after. Not in court, not in prison, in the mind. Because the moment after a crime is not filled with horror or clarity or madness. It's filled with disorientation. You stare at what you've done, at the blood, at the broken silence, at the evidence of impact, and your brain freezes, not because it doesn't care, but because it can't process. Not yet. Let's talk about psychological shock. Your body is still running adrenaline. Your mind is fractured between timelines. You feel numb, not relieved. You move automatically. Wash your hands. Close a door. Look at your phone. Pretend for just a second that it didn't happen. But it did. And now your identity has split. Let's talk about post-crime compartmentalization. There is now a before you and an after you. And the distance between them is unbearable. You can't hold both in your head. So your mind builds a wall. You justify. You rewrite. You detach. You tell yourself, it wasn't that bad. They pushed me. I was out of control. But you weren't. And you know that. And the guilt, when it does come, doesn't come as emotion. It comes as weight, Let's talk about the mask of normalcy. You go home, you sit on your bed, you turn on the TV. The world keeps moving. No alarms, no sirens, no screams. You thought it would feel dramatic, but it doesn't. It feels empty. You eat, sleep, go outside, and you wonder, can anyone see it in me? Let's talk about paranoia. It doesn't matter if you covered your tracks. Your mind begins to leak. Every glance feels like suspicion. Every sound feels like pursuit. Every question feels like a trap. You can't relax. You can't breathe. You can't stop checking over your shoulder. You start to see yourself as the hunted, and yet a part of you doesn't feel sorry. Let's talk about emotional decay. Remorse, for some, never comes, not because they're evil, but because they've hardened against themselves, against others, against the past. They tell themselves it was justice. They repeat the same story until it becomes memory. And over time, the horror fades. The face blurs. The act becomes an event, not a wound. But for others, the guilt never leaves. Let's talk about haunting. It doesn't come in screams. It comes in dreams, in silences, in quiet moments when the brain isn't busy. You wake up at night, seeing what you did, hearing it, feeling it. You imagine going back, undoing it, stopping yourself, but you can't. And that realization that you are now the thing that can't be undone becomes the deepest scar of all. Let's talk about the final dissociation. Eventually, you stop trying to feel. The memory becomes distant, not because you're healed, but because you've shut down. You become a shell, a person who once did something they never talk about, never admit, but it's always there, beneath the skin, in the mirror, in the silence between breaths. Let's pause here. You thought the crime ended when it was over, but for the mind that crossed the line, it never ends. You can bury it, deny it, rewrite it, but the moment exists, frozen in time, etched into the nervous system, burned into the identity. You don't escape it. You become it.